I know Paul was under a lot of stress there. Lisa Martin, welcoming everyone here as part of the Programs Committee. How many of you are going to ELC? Registered already? All right. Paul, you did a great job. So again, I know all of you are here for the road ahead for FY 2014. And with that, I have the honor of representing the Programs Committee and introducing our moderator, Dan Chenok, who's in the back. Come on down. Dan, as you know, is formerly with OMB. He's currently the Executive Director for the IBM Center for the Business of Government, and he's the Vice Chair for IAC. And a little something I thought I'd share. I always like to make sure I introduce people correctly. Dan is so dedicated to IAC that while I was out of town and couldn't make the executive retreat, Dan brought his wife to also celebrate their wedding anniversary as well, and then got to take her out to a nice little restaurant, I understand. So just so you know, you've got a dedicated moderator here to introduce you to a great group of panelists. So with that, Dan, and I'm not even going to touch this. Is someone change this?
Thanks, Lisa. Unless you think I'm crazy, no, my wife doesn't travel everywhere with me. And it was a very kind of IAC to welcome us both. There were a couple of other folks who were able to travel with their significant others, so it really was a nice event. And a good planning session that you'll hear about in the coming year, and the Jim, I'm sure, referred to themes from that session as well. So thanks to Lisa and Deb, and also Debbie Granberry, the other program leader on the IAC Executive Committee for the year. They're doing a great job. This is the first of what I'm sure will be a number of terrific programs that we'll have throughout the coming year. And it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Two of them are here. One of them is still, I think, in traffic somewhere, but will be here soon. So we're going to tell a few jokes in the meantime. Dr. Dave and Dr. Rick, will you come up and join me? So little did you know, this is all part of the introduction, that they're both actually doctors, and so if there's anybody who's not feeling well, you can raise your hand and they will attend. And as many of you probably know who I've met when I was in the government, I'm here both wearing my hat, if you will, my day job hat with IBM, my hat as a Executive Vice Chair of IAC, and I'll be looking forward to working with you this year and next year. And Jim is a great leader, and we'll look forward to a great year with the executive committees for both ACT and IAC in terms of working with you as members throughout the year. But I'm also here in my hat as an OMB alum, and I've met many of you probably more than a decade ago when I was at OMB and working through a number of the issues that we're dealing with now. And I was there in 1996 when we had the 5-day shutdown, and then the 21-day shutdown, and then the 5-day snow day. Don't forget the snow that was right after the shutdown, for those of you that can remember that famous winter of 96. And so we'll see what happens in the next week. But this panel is not about what's going to happen in the next week. None of us know exactly how that will occur. If anybody in the audience, by the way, does know how the conference will resolve this, please. No? Okay. So we're really looking at the next year, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce the panel, and I'm sure we'll be joined by our third panelist shortly, so I'll try to do this with as much time and deliberate time as we can. So to my immediate right is Dr. Dave McClure. When I was at OMB, Dave was essentially my counterpart at GAO, so we had a love-hate relationship at the time, but we got a lot of things done together. And Dave then, after GAO, went to be the head of e-government programs with the Council for Excellence in Government. After that, he went to Gartner, where he was essentially the head of research into government issues with Gartner. And from there, went to GSA. In his job as the leader of the Office of Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies. And if there were some stops along the way that I forgot, you can explain. That's plenty. Okay, so we're really fortunate to have Dave here in that capacity. And of course, Dr. Holgate, Rick Holgate, who, as Jim mentioned, is your president of the American Council for Technology this year, and in his day job is the CIO of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the head of Science and Technology, right, for the same. Another little known fact about Rick is that he did come from NCIS. So those of you that have a desire to write TV scripts, Rick probably knows the people who know the people who write the show. So feel free to come up afterwards, and over a drink, I'm sure you can make a deal. And Kathleen, who will be arriving, we hope, shortly through traffic. And I'll just introduce her in absentia so she can come up and join us in real time, is the CFO at the Veterans Health Administration at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I actually met Kathleen before I met Dave. When I started at OMB as a young analyst 25 years ago or so, Kathleen was also a young analyst 25 or so years ago. And so we did a lot of work together. I see another young analyst from OMB in those days, Scott Cameron, in the back of the room. So any other young analysts from OMB 25 years ago around? KT then went on to a very distinguished career to leadership positions at the Internal Revenue Service, at GSA, where she was the head of government-wide policy, as well as their chief financial officer, and now in her role at VA. And KT is also a member of the ACT Executive Committee. So, and I should add to Dave's illustrious portfolio that Dave is a member of the Executive Advisory Council that works with both ACT and IAC and gives us very senior strategic direction. So we've got a good panel that not only does terrific and transformational work, has great expertise on the topic that we'll be talking about today, but is also very closely aligned with ACT-IAC, and I think that it demonstrates the power and prestige of this organization and how we really are dedicated to improving government in so doing. So I'm actually going to sit now and drink my water, and I'm told that I should do a little more soft shoe, and Stacey is walking down the hall. Okay, she's on her way. Okay. You need me to tie my tie? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Okay, very good. So we'll go ahead and I'll give you all a hand signal when I see her in the back of the room, so you can give her a round of applause. The first question that we really want to address, and again, we're talking about the next year, not the next week. The first question that we really wanted to address is, what are the key priorities that your agency is going through over the next year? What can we in industry do to sort of recognize and understand what your key drivers are, so that we can, as we're developing our work with you, as we're working through ACT-IAC to develop programming, et cetera, we can understand those sets of priorities. So Dave, why don't I start with you, and then we'll go to Rick, and then by the time we get through Rick, Kathleen will have sat down and be comfortable.
Great. So I've got a little bit of a voice issue going on. I sound a little deeper than normal because I need a doctor. Yes, I need a doctor. Allergies are alive and well.
Kathleen Turco.
All right.
KT, I introduced you in your absence, and I reminded them that of our meeting at OMB almost 25 years ago as young.
Thanks for that number.
Yes. All right, go ahead.
So apologies for the voice maybe going in and out. Let me start just with GSA as a whole, and then maybe as we go into this, I can get a little bit more into some things that we're working on in my office as part of the government-wide agenda, since that's what I'm largely focused on. GSA is, to no one's surprise, focused on space or building management, acquisition, and technology. Those are the three troughs of work that we do in the General Services Administration. I think there's for the next year. Dan Tengerlini, who is now the administrator, no longer acting, but has been sworn in as the administrator, has an aggressive agenda for innovation and reform in GSA, in all three of those areas, actually. And in all three of the areas, they're going to definitely touch the technology community. In the space or building management area, we've just moved back into 1800F. It's renovated workspace. We've actually begun to package a solution around what we've done with that building. It's called the Total Workplace Solution, which is an integration of technology, space management, air and cooling technology, green technology, as an example of what we think office space should look like going forward in the future. So we're very much focused on trying to illustrate, the road ahead in terms of making a maximum efficiency out of the buildings that we manage. We'll save somewhere around $24 million in leases as a result of the consolidation of people and space into that building. And again, we think it's a model. Also in the buildings area, I think there'll be a continued push in the area of smart building technology, where there's an integration of building management information, energy information into smart solutions, so that building managers really have information at their fingertips to know how to optimize how we're utilizing the space, how we're cooling the space, how we're managing the space on a day-to-day capacity basis. So I think that's definitely areas where the technology community will play a role. In the acquisition area, there's going to be continued work in acquisition reform. I guess acquisition reform never goes away. It's always with us. Strategic sourcing is still a big push out of FAST. I think you'll see a lot of attention being paid to the prices paid portal to bring transparency across government in terms of what government agencies are paying for services from the vendor community. And I think Tom Sharp is focused on schedules as well, always looking at how we can modernize and improve the marketplace that we offer through the schedules program. So those are big areas. The third area around technology, and actually the third area in general at GSA, is around consolidation. As you know, we have consolidated. Kathleen knows as well. She was part of it while she was there. We've consolidated the CFO function, CIO function, the CPO function, and an administrative services function into an enterprise-wide offering. So all IT is now owned by Casey Coleman. The CFO is in charge of all finance and budgeting. It's a consolidation and centralization of those responsibilities. And that's a big step. It's a big step for any government agency, and it's a big step to do all four of those at one time. And certainly in each of those areas, GSA, I think, is challenged with analytics and information to be able to manage at the enterprise level. So I think those are really key areas for us to be successful. So those are some of the things that we're really focusing on.
Thanks, Dave. Rick?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'm going to talk this afternoon mainly kind of at the Department of Justice level, just because I think that's probably of more interest to more of you than just if I address ATF specifically. So DOJ overall, if you look at us as a department, we're roughly a $27 billion a year enterprise. So a relatively large organization. About 50% of those resources goes towards law enforcement, and most of that is, as you might imagine, the FBI. Of the remainder within DOJ, about 30% or so goes to prisons and detention. So managing federal prisons and so forth. About 12% to litigation, so all the attorneys in the Department of Justice are about 12% of the enterprise, and then about 6% in grants to state and local law enforcement or other state and local agencies. So large enterprise, it's about 115,000 employees. So a lot of what we do gets done through people. We don't tend to make a lot of large technology investments. I mean, certainly we make capital investments in things like prisons, but most of the work that we do is driven by the people who actually accomplish the mission. And so, frankly, one of the things that the Attorney General has been very focused on, particularly in light of the current fiscal situation this year and looking forward into next year, is protecting the mission by protecting the people who accomplish the mission. So there has been a lot of focus, frankly, on avoiding furloughs of our people and, to the extent that we can, positioning ourselves going into 14 and beyond such that we can minimize the amount of impact that we will have on our people throughout the department. And as you can imagine, that can put a stress on all the non-personnel aspects of the department. So of that $27 billion I mentioned, about $2.7 billion, or a tenth of it, is IT. So a fairly substantial IT portfolio, and naturally when you're trying to protect the people, the natural place to look for economies and efficiencies is in the IT portfolio. Now, the interesting thing in the Department of Justice is that of that $2.7 billion IT portfolio, only about a ninth of it, or $300 million, is actually controlled by the department. The rest of it, 8/9 of it, exists within all of the components within the Department of Justice. So it's all separately appropriated, it's separately managed by all the components within the department, and so trying to drive efficiencies throughout the department in that IT portfolio can be a somewhat interesting proposition, as you might imagine. I'll talk a little bit about kind of what the department is doing to manage that IT portfolio more effectively. From a mission perspective, I think one of the things you're going to see continued emphasis on from the department is something the Attorney General recently announced called Smart on Crime. And it probably didn't get the level of attention that it probably deserved, because I think most of the reaction to it was that the department was going to essentially reduce its sentencing guidelines for nonviolent drug crime. And that was kind of the main message that was taken from that initiative. But that was only one of about 5 points of the Smart on Crime initiative. And the rest of it was really a focus on violent crime and gun violence, and really marshaling all of the resources within the Department of Justice to better fight violent crime across the United States, and really using the U.S. attorneys to lead that effort and to bring together all of the information and resources and community assets that are out there to fight the problem of violent crime in our communities. And I think when you look across the country in places like Chicago and others, I mean, violent crime is still a problem in the United States, and it's in some cases a highly visible problem. And the department has a unique role in helping to bring together all the resources to try and fight that epidemic of crime. So I think you'll see continued focus on that from the Attorney General's level in the coming year. From an IT perspective, I alluded to the fact that, frankly, there isn't a lot of ownership of the IT portfolio at the department level, and so a lot of the emphasis is really collaborating across the components and really operating more like an integrated agency. So historically we've been very disparate and decentralized in the way that we've managed IT. In today's environment we can't afford to do that anymore, and we really need to act more like a unified agency. And so we've strengthened the CIO Council in the department, we've strengthened some of the governance around IT in the department, and I would expect to see continued emphasis in that area. We're looking more and more toward things like shared services and shared solutions in general, and in particular we've got some initiatives around consolidating our email environments, looking at mobile device management, mobile application environments as a shared service, and also property management as a shared service. So really looking wherever possible to adopt shared solutions across the department, but doing it in a way that's not threatening to the individual autonomy of the components. So the concept that the DOJ CIO has embraced is acquiring collectively but executing individually. So really pooling our buying power across the department without necessarily forcing everyone into a common solution that becomes a long drawn-out proposition to actually implement. So I think you're going to continue to see emphasis in those areas. And then just a quick preview of the DOJ IT strategic plan for the next couple of years. A lot of the themes I just talked about: institutionalizing IT portfolio management, streamlining IT operations to serve customers better, enhancing IT security, delivering innovative solutions to meet customer needs, and expanding information sharing. So that's a quick snapshot.
Thanks, Rick. Kathleen.
So I'm doing a quick snapshot. So I'm now at VA. So and this is this is loud. And I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the Veterans Health Administration. And so I want to give you a little bit background on VHA and what we're doing, and then I'll talk in terms of VA and the IT, because the IT for VHA underpins everything that we are doing in delivering of the health care. VHA's mission, and if you haven't seen it, we have just put out at the VA level the new strategic plan for Veterans Administration. So it's out on I think you can get it through the Federal Register, but it's out for review. But the VHA mission is honor America's veterans by providing exceptional health care that improves their health and well-being. And one of our, in terms of the vision, is the benchmark of excellence and value in health care. And we are about 300, VA about 300, we were just doing the numbers this morning for the CR, 365,000 of which 296,000 employees are with the Veterans Health Administration across 152 hospitals, and then a prolifery of medical clinics across the United States, and actually even in Manila Philippines, we're doing head counts right now. So we have quite a challenge ahead of us in terms of our healthcare delivery. What we're doing right now is sort of morphing towards a new set of 3 goals. The first is providing veterans with personalized, proactive, patient-driven healthcare. Number 2 is achieving measurable improvements in health outcomes. And number 3, my favorite, aligning resources to deliver sustained value to veterans. We utilize 2 large models within the VHA. One is called the enrollee healthcare model, and it does the predictions around the healthcare requirements for 8 million plus veterans that are in our system. And it projects it out 20 years, and we use that then to project the budget requirements that we have that go to OMB. As many of you know, VHA has a 2-year budget. We have an advanced appropriations. So actually for the CR coming on Tuesday, we are exempt. The entire Veterans Health Administration is exempt from the CR because we actually have appropriations at Treasury for 2014 already. It is with that model, and then one that I manage, that's in a planning office. I manage what's known as the Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation Module, and that's actually how we allocate over $42 billion across the hospitals in over 82, right now we're at 62 to 82 medical care categories. So I have a substantial cost accounting team at VHA where we are working on the allocation by way of actual patient care, anywhere from basic patient care to end-of-life care that we do for our veterans. So aligning resources to both the strategic plan, to the enrollee healthcare model, and then how we allocate out every year is paramount to the healthcare delivery that we're doing. Another large section and a large set of issues that are going on, trying to find all my notes here, around the IT area, and I did sit and talk with Gail Graham. Gail heads up our health informatics office, and it's a substantial office. It's really where many of you should start if you're looking to work with VHA, because they maintain, I think, over 800 databases and multiple dashboards that we have for how we're showing how we're delivering on our health, and anywhere from what's it cost for patient care per day, per bed day, what's it cost for delivering on the different types of surgeries, et cetera. It breaks it down in multiple ways. A lot of this is online that you can get to. Gail and her team drive the majority of the IT requirements at VHA that are provided to Steph Warren and his team, because at VA we have the centralized Chief Information Officer office there. So Steph Warren and his team works with us on a daily basis in terms of both the infrastructure for VHA and VA, as well as all the healthcare IT requirements across the hospital. So right now we've been a bit challenged because, you know, we also have veterans benefits, and the quest to do the right thing and deliver on the review of the benefits drove a lot of IT development towards the VBA. So VHA has been, some are feeling a little left behind. We are working on that on the budget side in terms of getting them resources. But we are challenged in a couple of areas. One is in the metrics area in terms of the analysis and all the IT connections between the healthcare, what's being delivered, the cost, et cetera. Gail and I are working on that. On her list is electronic health records. That will go forward. There's no other way that we can deliver on the healthcare in the upcoming years. My Healthy Vet, if you haven't been online to see My Healthy Vet, that is really running everything. I'm sure some of you in here have worked on that. But that really is, at this point, one of the backbones to the healthcare delivery for the veterans. There is, some of you may have been working on a balanced scorecard effort that we have underway within VHA as well. Mental health care is huge. It's huge in terms of the delivery. We, over the last year, apparently hired more of the mental health care providers across the United States than any other health system. Women's health care is on the rise. The number of women's veterans are increasing daily, and the requirements of women vets are slightly different than men. so some adjustments being made. We're doing huge upgrades in the networks, what's known as the VISN, or the Veterans Integrated Networks across the hospitals and clinics. And we also have this patient-aligned care implementation that we're doing, the concept being part of the personalized care that we actually deliver as a team, the medical providers. That is requiring a substantial upgrade in the IT as well. They're literally wanting to walk in with iPads, computers, et cetera, and they're a team, whether the veteran needs a mental health provider or a regular intern doctor, or assistance with their medical issues, I'll just put it that way, we bring in a team. So that is requiring adjustments with how we're looking at the IT. I can tell you it's adjustments. We're trying to make adjustments in this Vera model that I have in terms of how we're delivering the money to the hospitals to do that. And behind that, Gail and her team and Steph Warren are working on all of the IT that's needed to deliver that. So I will stop at that.
Thank you, Kathleen. So we have three. Are we good? Three mission-critical agencies in various different fields of important government activity: healthcare for veterans, veteran services, criminal justice, and public safety, and then the mission of delivering for the government itself. All of them have elements in common, and there are a number of government-wide initiatives that are going on that, if I could ask you to sort of reflect on, of the government-wide initiatives, many of which our audience here is aware of. What are some of the government-wide initiatives that you see as enabling the achievement of missions that you've described, and also the missions of your brethren agencies?
Sure.
Dave, you want to start?
Well, I think, particularly in the cyber area, our work in FedRAMP is a facilitator and igniter for trying to bring on more cloud solutions into the government. So as we mature and scale up FedRAMP, I think that becomes a real spark for moving agencies comfortably into safe and secure cloud hosting environments and cloud application environments. We've already seen that. You're going to see more big-name cloud providers going through FedRAMP very soon, so the drumbeat continues, and I think that will be very helpful to agencies as we standardize how we're actually approaching security for the cloud. The other big area I think for us is that's an enabler. It's an enabler for a lot of things in every agency, both external and as well as internal, is identity management and authentication. So we are working jointly with NIST and the Postal Service to stand up a pilot dealing with a federated identity management solution for government. This would allow citizens to do single sign-on into any agency and to authenticate transactions and interactions and exchange of information in a very, very simple and workable way. It's a goal that we've been working on for a long time in government, and I think we have all finally realized in order for a lot of things to be successful, we've got to crack that. So I think that will be an exciting area of work for us in GSA to help enable lots of agencies to do very mission-critical and customer-focused work with citizens. The third area is mobile. We talk about mobile all the time. There are a lot of things that we really have to circle the wagons around mobile. One is understanding from our agency perspectives what are the areas where mobile applications make the most sense. We're not simply creating iTunes stores and loading them up with thousands and hundreds of thousands of applications that are neat and cool to do. We have to really think about what is it that the user needs internally and externally in our agencies from the mobile space, and what are the priority low-hanging fruit things that really make sense to move to mobile environments. Moving to mobile environments itself is not an easy task, and we've spent a lot of time in my office on responsive design, taking the ability to actually shrink the screen in meaningful ways onto different devices so that it's workable and usable. There are not many agencies that have actually done responsive design on their websites, and as a result, the mobile experience is quite checkered right now. The other area in mobile is trying to figure out how we develop mobile applications cradle to grave that ensures security, and compliance with government policies, interoperability standards that we establish. And there's a lot of work being done. DHS is doing a lot of work in this area, and I think that's going to accelerate probably the movement into mobile as well. Common application development process, a way to test and reuse mobile code so that we can share it across the agencies. So I think those are three really critical areas for us going forward. There's some others, but I think I would just highlight those.
Thanks, Dave. By the way, if you're standing in the back and you want to sit, there's plenty of seats up here in the front on the left. Feel free to come on up. Okay, Rick?
Well, Dave actually stole a lot of my answers. But no, I mean, just to reiterate some of the things that Dave did mention, I think certainly all of us benefit from some of the great work that GSA is doing in terms of putting in place either better acquisition vehicles for all of us to use, or leading the way in security initiatives through things like FedRAMP, or showing what's possible through things like some of their efforts in mobile application design and user experience, and thinking differently about how we expose some of our applications and services to our user populations. Specifically within DOJ, I think certainly the managed mobility program at GSA, where they're looking to put in place better, more economical, more cost-efficient mechanisms for all of us to buy mobile services, whether it's just basic devices and airtime, or increasingly getting into areas like mobile device management, mobile application stores. I mean, we're certainly looking at those kinds of vehicles to avoid having to go through all of that kind of acquisition on our own within DOJ. Similarly with FedRAMP, I mean, certainly that lowers the barrier to moving toward cloud solutions. And as we start contemplating more cloud solutions, the FedRAMP authorized service providers are certainly going to be the natural first place we look when we start entertaining those solutions. And then last but not least, I mentioned we're looking at email consolidation. Certainly GSA's email as a service BPA that's out there, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, I think it's safe to say that that's going to be our default acquisition vehicle for whatever the departmental requirement for email ends up looking like. And Dave also mentioned the work that DHS is doing with mobile security. So a mobile security reference architecture, mobile security baseline, the whole mobile technology tiger team that's really a cross-agency collaboration among DHS, DOJ, DOD, really has done some unprecedented work in terms of coming up with a common security baseline that all three of those agencies and others have agreed to, which that's pretty unheard of in the federal space, where we can stop arguing over variations on security controls and say, okay, this represents a common baseline that we can all agree to. And that's a huge accomplishment, and they're continuing to move forward on other aspects of mobile security to include things like two-factor authentication and identity and access management and other things. So great work there. And then also, Dave alluded to the DHS mobile car wash, providing a common platform for testing of mobile application code. And we're experimenting with them on running some of our early application development efforts through that platform to get a sense of how does the application behave and is it developed well and so forth. And then just a couple of other things I would add. I would say portfolio stat at the OMB level has been a huge driver for us, not just because it's frankly a data collection exercise, but because it's forced collaboration to occur among DOJ components to increase cost visibility, transparency, to really cause us to collaborate more closely on why we do have different costs among the various components, how we compare among each other, how we compare to other agencies, and really driving a conversation about, well, why are our costs at that level when our peers are at a different lower cost level, and how can we drive our costs down to that lower level, or how can we realize some efficiencies that clearly could be wrung out of our IT portfolio. So a lot of benefit from just that visibility and exposure of the IT portfolio.
So government-wide challenges that we're having, I would say it's the identity management, security, and mobility. On identity management, the challenge has become the use of the PIV card. And so you're a doctor and you're trying to write a script for a patient, and at this point there was a requirement for you to use a PIV card to put into the system. Everything's electronic. It doesn't work so well that way, so there's a huge challenge with the medical centers and for the medical personnel in terms of how we're going to use identity management to deliver our medical care, to deliver prescriptions, to deliver what our veterans need. So that is being looked at heavily because it's a huge challenge for us. It's different. You all know if you're sitting at a desk and you're putting your card in, whoop-de-doo. So That's easy enough. We live in a highly encrypted world. This is new for me. You probably do it already at DOJ, but we have encryption on almost every email that I receive, because the chance of receiving either such security numbers, but even more so medical data on a veteran, on a patient, is sitting behind all that we do. So that has become huge for VA. And for VHA in terms of managing the security. You've seen Steph Warren talk about it on the Hill. It is not easy to address, and it's become a huge challenge for VA in terms of managing that. And I would say mobility. So mobility for the doctors. One of the biggest challenges we've had is with the centralization of the CIO, a good idea. It's also a centralized fund, and we're in this very interesting discussion around, well, isn't an iPad a medical device? So I think it's been the NIH or FDA, et cetera, has been ruling on what is a mobile device for the medical community or not, because if it's seen as a medical device, then I can ensure that they get the funding out of the VHA budgets. I can't do that if it's out of the CIO budgets. So we have a very healthy discussion around these things. The other challenge we're having around the mobility is that we have a range of age of the patients, right? So you have the younger patients up into folks into their early 60s. Once they hit 65, they tend to go out of the VA system and they're on Medicare. The younger veterans want things mobile. They want it on their iPhone. They want it on their iPad. They're loving telehealth, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a crossover age of about 52 where folks are not. So we're having now to almost maintain two worlds, one of mobile, electronic, the telehealth function, as well as folks who want to be seen in person, and by the way, they still want paper. So, in fact, I was dealing with paper checks yesterday. So we are still, I mean, Treasury must not care for us much. We are still using paper checks. So, and cash at many of the medical centers. So we have a huge challenge with that in terms of, yes, in terms of getting that out of the system. So, well, you don't tell a veteran you can't have his cash. So, so we're working on that. But the mobility is huge, and it's growing. It's a huge opportunity area in terms of how we can work with VA and change the mindset there. So
interesting.
Lots of changes, and lots of changes in medical care and what gets delivered. And there is surprisingly there's a lot of competition within VA on that in terms of us competing with Kaiser comes to mind because they also are a closed system. So in a positive way. And then we have the challenges around efficiency, quality of care, and access. So that's the big deal, access, providing access to all veterans. There's actually 22 million veterans in the United States, and the Secretary would like to grow. What we have right now is about 8 to 9 million enrolled, and about 6.5 million actually are using the VA system consistently.
Thanks, Kathleen. Interesting commonalities across all three speakers. Identity management, cybersecurity, and mobility were key to in all three in terms of government-wide initiatives that are driving the achievement of agency-specific routes. And if you think about it from an industry perspective, there are actually three processes underlying each issue that we can plug into if you think looking at fiscal 14 and what's happening now. One is the Cybersecurity Executive Order, which the President signed on, which a number of the themes that the speakers talked about are being addressed by NIST right now and working with DHS and the administration in developing a framework in concert with industry, which would reflect a number of sort of key tenets of cybersecurity. And if your company is not involved in that, there are certainly ways to plug in there. Under identity management, there's the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, which again is an industry-led identity management framework. Jim Williams and I are both very involved in that effort as well. And that again provides an opportunity for your companies to play in and participate, and we're happy to talk with you individually if you want to learn more about that. And then of course in the mobility arena there's the digital government strategy, which ACT-IAC played a major role in contributing to from the industry side through the Advanced Mobility Working Group that Rick led with Tom Suter, who's here with us today, and certainly we'll continue to look to that going forward. So again, good comments from you all on issues that affect your agencies in real ways in terms of mission achievement. So turning in that vein, thinking about what industry can do to provide creative thinking interesting solutions that would address mission challenges, government-wide challenges. What kinds of things would you have our colleagues here today think about as they go back and talk with their colleagues?
You don't want to start down there?
Why don't we start?
Dave's like, wait a minute, why am I always...
I was going to say, why don't we start in the middle and then go right and left?
Right.
Okay. And I would, I guess, categorize my thoughts in three areas. First being, and I think you'll hear some of the same theme from Steve Van Rokel and others, is kind of lowering the barriers to new solutions. And if you've heard Steve Van Rokel talk, you've mentioned him say the concept of 2013 as the last year we talk about a 5-year, $100 million IT acquisition. So I mean, this is kind of reiterating some of the themes he's already really vocalized and articulated of finding ways to approach new capabilities, new solutions with less upfront investment, more rapid delivery, and more reduced risk in the process. And I think particularly given the current fiscal environment that we're all in, having access to large sets of resources to invest over a prolonged period of time before we see actual delivery, that's going to be increasingly difficult. So whatever creative approaches you can bring to government in terms of delivering things more rapidly, thinking more creatively about how we get more quickly and more incrementally toward new capabilities and new solutions, I think that's certainly welcome creativity from our perspective. I think the second is, and this is stealing shamelessly from an old Wayne Gretzky thing about skating to where the puck will be. And in particular, I think you're increasingly seeing the government looking for things, incorporating cloud solutions, incorporating an as-a-service model, et cetera. And in some cases, and I'll pick as one example, our initiative in DOJ around property management. Our initial thinking there was, we'd really ideally like a property management system as a service. We don't really want to necessarily build something on premise. We don't want to have something we want to maintain over time. We're really looking to see what's out there in an as-a-service model. And what we found when we did some industry research was there's not really that much out there. That's not a very mature model. No one had really kind of figured out, what would a software as a service model look like for property management, which was a little surprising. I think we had expected, perhaps unrealistically, that would be more readily available, or that would be a more readily accessible solution from industry. So I think looking downstream, expect that we're going to be looking more and more for as-a-service cloud-based solutions and incorporating that thinking into the way you conceive of solutions and the way in which you think about kind of government demand. I think that's important. I think one area where industry has been great in kind of leading government and getting out in front of us is things like agile development, right? So everyone I think has understood that that's an important discipline, capability, and so forth. I think we need to kind of extend that forward thinking to some of these other areas as well. And then last but not least, just really focusing on the outcome. I think we all get kind of bogged down in some of the legacy baggage that we all come to problems with, whether it's the technology that we've always had, whether it's the processes we've always used, kind of all the ways we've been used to working together. I think we collectively need to figure out a way to kind of shed as much of that as possible and really think as open-mindedly and as creatively as possible about how do we best achieve an outcome, even if it involves non-traditional approaches to things, even if it involves really discarding some of the old ways of doing business or the old technology that we've always gotten used to dealing with, and thinking really in a creative mindset.
Great. Kathleen?
All right. So I got some notes here from Craig Lugart. I went to him and I said, please help me. He works for, right now, many of you all know Craig, he works for Dr. Bob Jesse, who is our Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Health. And they are thinking daily about, first it's about the veteran, and it's about health care for the veteran. So many of you have worked with VA before, but just let me emphasize, it's about the veteran when you come in. So concepts around consumerism, replacing business as the primary driver, and that concept there is the patient-driven healthcare. What does the patient, the veteran, want in their healthcare? And so that's been part of our challenge, is the different types of veterans that we have by way of age group, by way of where they live. Rural health is a huge issue in terms of how we're delivering rural healthcare to veterans in the rural areas. How do we deliver telehealth, et cetera. So this is hugely dynamic right now. A big issue for Dr. Jesse and the team is decision support and making decisions How does the doctor go about that from both a mobile standpoint and having all of the records in front of them for that patient so that actually they're doing better, sort of faster patient care. So decision support is a huge issue. It's a huge in terms of IT and how that's going to get designed. So they've been working on that. Real-time monitoring and remote interventions should be the norm. So that is being driven through. The definition of a doctor visit is morphing almost daily. And so there's a huge challenge in terms of how to assist our doctors in how they're delivering that health care. Clear that under the 50 generation has a different and much more open view of sharing health information. So this is a real challenge for us because you all know we're under the HIPAA rules. So what vets want to see, what they want to receive in their health care has been a challenge to get at. So there's a movement in that. There's also a real need for, I'm going to use the words, open conversation about this. This has been not sort of the norm as well, but the Secretary is driving that. So, and clearly, we're just hot on metrics. If you're into metrics, if you're into the balanced scorecard, and if you're into how do we balance between delivering the right health care at the right price or cost and quality, then you need to come visit VA because there's a huge movement in that area.
Great. Dave?
Doesn't leave me much.
Be creative.
I did. I rewrote 5 things. So I have 5 things that I think we could use industry input on, and some of them are touching upon what Rick and KT said. I do think we continue to struggle in the government with moving from a commodity mentality to a services mentality. And even though we, as Rick said, are looking for services, we don't know how to buy services. And we really need industry help and pushing to get us to get into that services environment, both from an acquisition perspective and a performance perspective. And you're part of that equation because most companies are quite comfortable selling commodities and products and themselves may not be nearly as comfortable selling it as a service, not knowing what demand levels are, pricing models are, and so forth. So we need a lot of help jointly, I think, on that. The second area is analytics. There's a lot of talk about big data. I think it's all about making big data smaller. We're drowning in data in the government. But more importantly than that, I think it's trying to figure out how do we use the power of the analytics packages and software that your companies are developing in multiple environments. We need it in security because we're moving quickly into continuous monitoring environments where we're going to drown in monitoring data. We have to be able to interpret it, to look at trends, and we can't rely upon humans to do all of that because of the volume involved. We're depending heavily upon the web. We need web analytics. We've pushed some out. We have to understand how customers are using government services online, what the experience is like, how do we improve it, where are they going to actually interact with the government, and what can we do to enhance that. This week really has highlighted for me the need for analytics in the budget process. We're being asked to construct budgets and shutdown plans and different scenarios depending on whether it's a 10, 15, 20, 5, 2, 3% cut.
Do now, Dave.
And we need some analytics just to run the government's budget sheets. So there's an area for you. So that's second area is analytics. Lots of things there. Third area is in cloud delivery solutions. I think we've moved beyond do we use the cloud or do we not use the cloud? And now the conversation is around how do we use the cloud? How do we merge it into our portfolio of investments that we're trying to make? We all need help in understanding how different types of cloud solutions fit into agency-unique computing environments and the risk postures that they inherit. There's not a single solution necessarily that will be used across government. More importantly, how do we move to cloud solutions and focus on data security rather than system security? So we've got to tackle data security at rest, in transit, in use. And that's a different model than what the government has created through FISMA And so I think increasing attention in that area. Fourth one is enterprise solutions. Everything GSA is focusing on in the IT area has got an enterprise twist to it. We don't want standalone solutions. We want enterprise solutions, whether it's HR, budget, finance, document management, workflow tracking. We have to feel an enterprise flavor to it because there's just enormous cost savings and greater simplicity in managing the portfolio because you have a single solution that you're managing across multiple customers. And the last area I'd mention is sort of what Rick was talking about. Help us identify with common sense where some quick wins are in the government. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed. Some things are going to be multi-year in nature. Some things by design could be fixed in weeks. Where are those quick wins? What are your ideas for some broken processes or broken things that you have solutions that actually can deliver on those problems in a very, very agile and fast manner? There'll probably be politics and budgets and everything else involved in figuring out which one of those quick wins we do, but this administration is focused on 6-month, 6-week projects and delivering value fast. And we have some big things to tackle, but we have some things that we can do, I think, in some very short time frames. So help us think through what those things are.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Excellent advice from all three of you. So we're going to open it up. We have 3 exceptionally talented leaders in their agencies that are driving change, as you've heard. We have microphones that are going to circulate, so just raise your hand. We'll call on you. Feel free to direct the question, and do identify yourself, please, and where you're from, what company or organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Diane Ashley with Lockheed Martin. There appears to be, I don't know if it's so much as a dichotomy, as maybe tension, healthy tension between enterprise solutions and then, similar to what Rick was talking about, incremental solutions. The approach, of course, the end goal is enterprise, but the approach in procurement, a lot of things, what we're seeing is more incremental in nature. Would you speak to maybe 2 parts? What are your thoughts on that healthy tension, and maybe procurement avenues that you currently favor in order to get to the end goals?
Just I get a clarification. When you say incremental, you mean buying still point solutions or office or unit-specific solutions?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I do think there's a lot of chatter at the executive level in agencies and departments about enterprise solutions, but the buying gets done still in the bureaus and in the guts of the organization. And so in GSA, what we've done is actually, and this is not necessarily the right thing to do, I'm just telling you that this is what we've done. In order to move to enterprise solutions, first of all, you have to have transparency around what the heck it is you're buying now. And not a lot of agencies or departments understand that menu of things that are being purchased now or entering into contracts. So that's one thing, is transparency into the as-is. The second thing is you've got to track and or put an approval process in that forces enterprise solutions. So we have gone through and are going through what can be considered a painful process. It used to be easy to go buy something, it used to be easy to get into a contract, but now it's going to be examined to determine whether it's meeting or duplicating a solution that we're trying to put in across the enterprise. If it is, it's going to be stopped, and the business owner will be asked justify. So some of it's just common sense stuff like that, but it does require governance, it requires strong leadership, and it requires just constant attention to it. Otherwise, the procurement process will go on its own.
It's the governance. It's also the decision-making up front and sticking with it. And Dave's right in terms of the analytics. A lot of the challenge we have is not being able to see what's on contract or what folks have been spending. So that has been quite challenging, digging into that and pulling that data together. But it's really more than anything else a leadership issue. Mm-hmm. It really is and we have it at VA now, where it's like, no, you just can't go out and procure things that way. You have to centralize it. So we work with Lynn Hagstrom, Jan Fry, Iris Cooper in terms of that approach. And certain things lend themselves to enterprise, and others do not. And I think one of the big challenges that agencies are having, we have it at VA, is the balancing of where we have the enterprise buys, and you have to meet all the small business goals. So, and those are necessary. Working through all of that has been very challenging for agencies as well. So, but also knowing who's in the marketplace is helpful as well on the industry side in terms of how one can fashion an enterprise approach.
Yeah, and as Dave alluded to, I mean, it's a delicate balance. I gave you a sense of kind of what DOJ looks like, in the sense that, something like 90% of our IT spend occurs in individual components as opposed to at the enterprise level. And so the balance is exercising some level of top-down leadership without alienating all the components, and still driving that level of transparency and visibility, and that can be difficult. I mean, even getting something as simple as, I mentioned email. I mean, we don't know how much we spend a day on email. We can kind of guess at it, but we don't really know. And some of it's obscured by the fact that some components maintain a lot of their email using in-house staff, so it looks like it's free, as opposed to now we're talking about moving to an as-a-service model where now you get a very specific bill every month, and now suddenly that looks like it's a huge cost increase, even though it may be actually cheaper, but it's different cost pools it's coming from. Some of it's invisible, some of it's now completely visible, and in some cases, as we move to enterprise solutions, you're moving people that are at disparate capability and cost levels today. You're now normalizing all of them, right, to some extent across the department. So that causes consternation at the high end of the scale, where someone has a very high end of capability and they're worried about losing capability with an enterprise solution. And at the other end of the scale, you have smaller components that are spending next to nothing, and they're happy not spending much but having a very low level of capability, and now you're talking about pulling them up. So you're making everyone uncomfortable by moving them onto this potentially enterprise solution. So the kind of the politics and the emotion and everything else are fairly delicate to navigate. But frankly, the fiscal situation today is making all of that a lot easier. A couple of years ago, when everyone was comfortable and fine sitting in their own individual components, it was very easy to kind of give the department a stiff arm and say we're not really interested in enterprise solutions. But now all of us are kind of taking a harder look at our individual portfolios and saying, look, there's probably some areas here where I'm comfortable shedding some of the responsibility for some of these services to an enterprise model, so I can really focus on those things that are unique to my particular mission area. So certainly the things like email and mobile device management, some things that are really not that close to the mission and are pretty common, those really do lend themselves to relatively easy adoption as enterprise solutions.
So, and I'll just add, so how many of you all worked on I think it's the Vista paper from a couple of years ago? A few of you still remember that. So that was an ACT-IAC paper. I just want everyone to know that is still in use, and I believe it's being updated at this point. And that had an enterprise view of the within VHA of IT management. I think it had collections in there. It had some of the reimbursable work. It had interfaces with third party for payments. And so that is a way really for ACT-IAC to influence. It was through that document. Because I know I was at a meeting and somebody was actually carrying that document with them. So in terms of the approach that we were taking, and it was actually in connection with the CIO's office to say, well, wait a minute, we have this enterprise approach here. How are you working with us? So just throw that out, that has been very helpful to have that design work, I'll call it. Jim's here.
We have a question from Jim.
Hey, Dan.
Hey.
First of all, it's been a great panel, and I'm not trying to end it, but you've talked to us about your priorities and your mission areas coming up, and you've asked for help with innovative solutions. My question would be really on behalf of the audience, how do they get those to you? Meaning there's you all, there's procurement people, there's small business people. If you want to hear about what are potentially innovative solutions, which could mean getting an email from everybody in this room, which may not help you do your job during the day.
Holgate.
Henry? It's actually Henry.
Well, but if people really believe they can...
Dr. Rick.
So if they believe they can help, how do they get those to you? Do you have a process for listening to the industry? And how do you do it so it doesn't overburden you? What's the advice to people who want to get those ideas to you?
Well, at GSA, my office, Casey's office, even
Casey Coleman, the
Casey
CIO.
Coleman, the CIO, and even Dan Tangerlini's office and his support staff are pretty open to listening to ideas and solutions. And I say that with a caveat in terms of we don't have enough time in the day to do what we do, so squeezing all of that in is problematic. But I mean, I meet with companies on a regular basis just to get informed about their solutions and share an exchange of ideas about what's going on. Not a sales pitch per se, but just to learn about solution sets and what's going on in their niche areas. I think that open door policy is good and it works. We also do a lot of industry days where we're looking to open up for industry to come in and talk about specific solutions in the identity or the security or the cyber or the mobile area. Those days are very, very important to get industry input as well. So those are some good channels. I think, again, this interaction that occurs with IAC and ACT is very valuable. The time that's spent in the interaction between government and industry in these kinds of environments also is extremely important for us to have an open, two-way communication process on listening and learning from each other. So I think those are good ways.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we in the Department of Justice also have a similar kind of mixed approach of, occasionally going out with formal requests for information or, more formal opportunities for input from industry. We are increasingly doing industry days. I'll say, frankly, probably as a department, we haven't taken as much advantage of that mechanism as we should have historically. But and then I think, the DOJ CIO has a pretty, relatively open door policy also in terms of engaging with industry, again, as time permits. I think the threshold there is that the discussion, the solution, the conversation needs to meet a certain threshold of relevance. So there needs to be a certain amount of due diligence in terms of making sure that what the discussion is going to be focused on is actually something that is of importance and relevance to the department and some specific challenges that we're facing. But other than that, I think if an idea, solution, capability meets that basic threshold, then generally we're pretty open to those interactions.
So I've only been at VA for about three months, so I'm not quite sure how they're working that. One of the things that I have been trying to do with VHA is actually get folks to participate in the ACT-IACT activities. Judy Douglas is helping me with Dr. Jesse, getting him on the EAC, right? So he can come in and talk about sort of his vision around the medical systems that they're going for and his focus on decision support. VA, I think, is talking about the cloud. I think that they're working with, this one I'm going to, DARPA, DISA, who offers clouds?
DISA.
Thank you. DISA. There's some back and forth there. So what I've actually been trying to do is actually to get folks, in particular in the health informatics area, to come and work with ACT-IACT. So I'm going to answer it from that way because I don't want to step on any toes in terms of Glenn Hagstrom or Steph Warren's lanes at this point.
Good. Other questions? Yes.
John O'Kay, an independent consultant. I want to ask a question, a little different twist than Jim Williams' question about innovation. Each of you in your remarks mentioned innovation, the budget challenges, and your desire for industry to bring innovative solutions. Dr. Holgate, you said we'd like to see solutions that don't look like what we've always been doing. Well, at a very practical level, how do you reconcile that desire with what industry sees increasingly in acquisitions, where it's low price, technically acceptable? It's technically acceptable is going to end up looking a lot like what you've always been doing all these years. So how can you work with industry to bring innovative solutions in a real practical, down-to-earth way through the acquisition process?
Okay, so yeah, I won't.
Dr. Holgate.
I certainly won't dispute the work that we have to do on our side between those of us in technology and IT and the acquisition community to work better together as a team to present more of a unified message and face to industry. And I know, frankly, we don't do that within my organization. I'm sure that's not unique to us, where the aspirations of information technology kind of get hung up somewhere in between what we'd like to accomplish and what ends up getting issued as an acquisition or a particular procurement, or the process of going through the evaluation ends up driving us in a direction that we didn't want. So and there's been some recent dialogue about this in the media as well. We need to do a better job of working together as an information technology and acquisition community to be, as I said, a more unified voice to industry and a more aligned voice to industry, so that what you're seeing in acquisition documentation reflects what we say we want to accomplish from a mission and an IT perspective.
Anything else?
So I'll add, so back right in the middle when we were putting the budget together for 2015-2016, we got a memo. It was issued out by the OMB director. There were a host of, there were 4 names on there. And it was performance-based budgeting and innovation. Did you all read that? Oh, I pulled that memo off the OMB website. So OMB now has seen that performance-based budgeting, which means we want to see outcomes and delivering, whether it's in grant programs or healthcare or military. They were tying some of the budget requests for 2015, now this has to go through the OMB process, to that. So I pulled that off and I said, I know we have innovative type work going on with VHA, but what the heck's going on? And that led me to Secretary Shinseki's office, where there's an innovation group there, an innovation lab. If you go on the VA website, you will see it has a little, I think it's like a light bulb or whatever in terms of innovations. And if you open that up, you will see a proliferary of innovation work that is going on. And I know they've been doing small grants because we fund it, small grant work around this. And I think you will get an understanding of where we're trying to go, in particular in healthcare delivery. But there's also benefits on there. And yes, our National Cemetery Administration has some innovation work on there, which, well, I won't go into that, but there's some pretty innovative things they're doing there in the cemeteries as well. So you might want to check that out. I think that'll give you a broader understanding of the innovative work going on at VA.
2 other points just to add. So within ACT-IAC, we have the Innovation Institute, which looks at innovative issues and trends that might affect government as a whole. I know Sarah DiCarlo, I see here, who's the leader of that effort. To the extent that there are innovations that might not be associated with a particular procurement where there's an LPTA issue or not, but are more general, I know we're happy to entertain that discussion. And then also one of the new priority areas that Jim Williams alluded to earlier in the opening remarks is around innovation in digital government and thinking about how to implement that. And so if there are, back to John's original question, if there is a particular procurement where you're hearing from the CIO or from the program leader, we need an innovative solution, and then the RFP comes out and it says basically, we're looking for the lowest price, and I'm sure that's never happened to anybody else. We in ACT-IAC can also act as a little bit of a mouthpiece, because it's not always for an individual company a self-interested move to say to the agency, you wrote the procurement in a way that's inconsistent with what we heard from the program. But if we can collect it sort of on behalf of the industry and give it back, there's a little bit of a layer, and we've got the relationships, as you've heard here from the panelists, to be able to do that. So I would encourage you to again, use ACT-IAC as a bit of a vector as well. Other questions? Are we 5 or 5:30? What's that? 5 is the
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, so we've got time for a couple more. Yep.
Yes. Could we pass it?
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Crampton from Empowered Strategies, and I enjoy the panel discussion. But I'm caught sometimes because of the way that, as you mentioned earlier, that we're already planning for 15, and actually we'll start planning for 16 here pretty soon. And you get business wants capabilities, but by the time we get there, if somebody's trying to be innovative, the technology's already changed. How are you within your agencies? You're trying to resolve that so that you you are planning, you're based it on a business requirement, but when you get there, that you have some flexibility in how maybe that requirement's delivered, and maybe it's cheaper, maybe it's more expensive, but how do you resolve that dichotomy?
Who's in charge of that 3-year budget process?
Yeah, right. Well, it's a very tough issue. I mean, it's just haunted us forever in government, in that our budget cycles are 24 months long, and the technology refresh cycles are now becoming 6 months, and so it really becomes increasingly difficult. But I don't think we can use that as a cop-out completely. I think what we need to do is, from an innovation perspective and a technology perspective, not be focused so exclusively on a technology as much as we're focused on the capability that we need to solve a business problem. It may be that the technology that was created 24 months ago is fine to answer that problem. We don't need to always be leading edge, leading everything. So it's not a good answer, but I think it's one in which it's the reality. We can't change it. I'm very fortunate in that a lot of the funds that I manage are know-your funds. It gives me a little bit more flexibility in the innovation space. We've talked to and tried to convince Congress to think about 2-year budgets for technology, for know-your funding, and it's a very difficult conversation to have because they want to retain control over the appropriations process and don't want to give that up. But, I think there's latitude and there's ways to get things done, and that's my advice, is to have conversations and truly understand the business functionality that a government program is trying to resolve, and trying to match technology solutions with that the best way possible.
Well, this is a tough one because it's Dave was saying it's 18 months, not 24, by the way.
Well, it's 24 in a lot of cases.
Well, anyway.
Depends on where you start.
It depends on when you start, but anyway.
And when you end.
Where you are.
We never end.
We never end.
Cigars.
It seems like that. Usually it's like it's the 3 years. This is really this is difficult because it's going to go back to that the memo, the performance-based budgeting, because before we even get to the Hill, we got to get through OMB. I think if we could help Van Rokel in any way, it would be to encourage him to provide greater, I'll use this word, education for the examiners at OMB, because I tell you, when you get to the IT, you hit a wall, and they're just like, well, cripes, haven't you gotten that solved? We're confused there, because honestly, the program side, the grants, the benefits delivery, what they're doing at the national parks, it's a little bit more exciting than, we're going to talk about IT again. So the other challenge that the agencies have, and I'm seeing it at VA, we had it at GSA, IRS has it, I'm sure you have it at Justice. The budgets are predominantly the infrastructure, and they're fixed as to how how things have been procured, how they're managed, et cetera. And it's that challenge, and I think that's the portfolio management that Van Rokel's trying to drive, and he's right on with that. How do agencies begin to adjust those budgets and allow for more development, allow for more innovation and creativity, so to speak, around the IT and agility in it? And so that really has to get pushed over the next 2 or 3 years, or it's just going to be tough. That does require that you're working with, candidly, a creative budget person as well, who can help you to divide those things out and separate and explain it. So, I always strongly encourage people to be nice to their budget people because they carry the message to the Hill and work it. The other side is the appropriators. It's also the authorizers. You have a lot of authorizers who want to tell the appropriators how to do things and tell agencies how to do things. So look at some of the IT budgets. Some of these things have gotten down to line items, and you can't move money around, and it's incredibly restrictive on the CIOs in terms of what they can do. That's not helpful, but that's, Congress has the purse strings, and if you make a mistake, if you trip up, they tighten up the purse strings and put all sorts of requirements in there. So I know that it's not a lobbying group here, but you can't dismiss that in terms of that relationship between the budget office, generally the main budget office, and the Hill. a lot of things happen there in terms of getting work done. I see Mr. Sindelar back there. He knows all about that. So, that is also where your CIOs and your procurement and your budget folks need to talk. So that alignment is really critical. And with the shrinking budgets, or maybe we're stopping them this year, who knows, that's going to be even more a challenge. So demystifying IT as well. I can tell you that's a challenge at the senior level, because they're like, what are you trying to do here to us? What are you talking about? And so it really, if we could help the CIOs with that would be really great. And relating it to, it's got to be outcome based. It's got to be program and benefit delivery based. Coming in there and saying, well, we're going to put in some PBX brand, I mean, people's eyes glaze over. It's how are you going to actually help us deliver on the healthcare, deliver on the benefits, deliver on the space. That's what they really need to hear at the senior level, at the secretary's level, at the administrator's level.
One point, another ACT-IAC activity is in Congressional Education Working Group, and while it's not a lobby, it's an educational function that works with the staff, and that's led, Don Arnold is somewhere in the room, and he can plug you in if you're interested in getting more involved there. And then at last week's Shared Services Forum, I don't know how many people here might have been at the forum last week. I see a few hands going up. So one of the key tools that was discussed by leaders of the shared services organizations, which do have to sort of spend money on a dime, if you will, to kind of keep their customers current, is the fact that they often have franchise fund authority or working capital fund authority, which collects money into a multi-year pot, if you will, based on the service that's provided. And I've been in a number of conversations since then which reflect some greater congressional interest in that model as well. So another potential area to be watchful for in the future.
Yeah,
so any final questions?
Question.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Madhu Komanduri from Northrop Grumman. One of you mentioned about the mobile technology Tiger team, and if you can elaborate a little bit more in terms of recommendations coming out of the Tiger team, whether it's Android or iOS implementations, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, that was a team that was put together specifically to address two of the digital government strategy deliverables, 10.2 and 9.1, which probably don't mean anything to you, but 10.2 was, yeah, sorry. 10.2 was identifying barriers, obstacles, gaps, and opportunities, something along those lines, in adoption of mobile technology in the federal government. So that was just kind of getting a look at the landscape of, all right, what's preventing us from moving forward in mobility. And then 9.1 was this mobile security reference architecture and mobile security baseline that, again, was the collaborative work of DHS, DOD, DOJ, and a couple of other agencies that also participated in that, which really looked at taking the NIST 800-53 security controls and saying, all right, how do we apply that to consumer, commercial, mobile devices in one particular use case, so a GFE device, so a government-furnished device for a federal user. And there are a bunch of other use cases, obviously, that span the range to BYOD and classified and a bunch of other things, but they looked at that predominant use case and said, this is what the security baseline would look like in that particular use case. And so, in principle, you could take that security baseline and say, all right, if I need to implement mobile device management or buy a mobile device management solution, that's my standard. That's my security baseline. Meet that, and I'm done. That was a deliverable that they actually produced back in May, because that's when it was due. But the team has stayed together because there are other use cases to look at. There are other issues that exist in the mobile space beyond that one particular deliverable. And so they're in the process of actually right now prioritizing what their next set of efforts will look like. So they are looking at a range of possible things, like I mentioned, of two-factor authentication, where NIST now has some standards around that. Looking at broader issues around identity and access management. Let's see, what else are they looking at? Suffice it to say, a long list of potential things they can continue to address as a cross-agency initiative, where ultimately we'll have a federal-wide perspective on some of those opportunities and solutions, as opposed to each of us individual as agencies figuring it out on our own.
Okay. Well, please join me in thanking our terrific panel. And thank you for